In the early 15th century, while Colombo was still planning his modest voyage across the Atlantic with 3 tiny caravels, another global power was already sailing the high seas, commanding a fleet 5 times the size of any European vessel. This was the Ming Dynasty at its peak. Their ships were bigger, their compass technology was more advanced, and their naval power was unmatched. They could have claimed any land they wanted, reaching the Americas decades before anyone else. Yet, in one of history's most baffling geopolitical decisions, they simply stopped. They burned their ships, abandoned the ocean, and retreated into a self-imposed isolation that would doom their empire centuries later. This is the story of the Ming Dynasty, the glorious age of Chinese naval supremacy, the building of the Forbidden City, and the tragic internal political battles that convinced the global giant to shut itself down. To understand the splendor, we must start at the beginning. The Ming Dynasty was founded in 1368 by a former peasant and Buddhist monk named Zhu Yuanzhang, known as the Hongwu Emperor. He led a massive rebellion that successfully drove out the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. This was a triumph of native Han Chinese rule, promising a return to order, stability, and unprecedented greatness. Under the early Ming emperors, especially the Yongle Emperor, China underwent an incredible transformation. Massive construction projects became the signature of their power. The extensive rebuild of the Great Wall, and the construction of the heart of Chinese power, the Forbidden City in Beijing. This was a stable, incredibly rich, and technologically advanced empire. But their true projection of power wasn't in stone. It was in wood and sail. Enter the most consequential figure of this period. Admiral Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch, he commanded the treasure fleet's hundreds of ships carrying up to 28,000 men. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 massive expeditions. They weren't about invasion. They were about demonstrating power and establishing a tributary system. China needed nothing. They were simply proving their superiority. He sailed to modern-day Kenya, bringing back exotic animals like giraffes and elephants. He established trade, diplomacy, and most importantly, naval dominance across the Indian Ocean decades before Vasco da Gama. This era begs the question, what if they had continued? Given their technology and resources, China was perfectly positioned to become the dominant global empire, potentially shaping the world we know today in a completely different way. But in the 1430s, the Ming Empire made the decision that would define its decline. They abandoned the ocean. The voyages abruptly stopped, the plans were destroyed, and the great ships were allowed to rot. Why? The answer lies in a bitter political rivalry in the Forbidden City. The voyages were championed by the eunuch faction, but they were bitterly opposed by the powerful Confucians. The scholars argued that the expeditions were a colossal waste of resources, money that could be better spent on internal matters, especially defending the true threat. The Mongols from the north, the scholars won. The Haijin policy, or sea ban, was enforced, making private maritime trade a criminal offense. China turned its back on the world, focusing entirely on its land defenses. This created a power vacuum that, over the next 2 centuries, Europe would eagerly fill, setting the stage for the West's global dominance and China's later vulnerability. The giant had deliberately tied its own hands. The seeds of the Ming's collapse were sown not by a foreign army, but by this crippling inward focus and internal mismanagement. By the 17th century, the Ming faced massive economic instability. Despite closing the seas, American silver, brought by Spanish traders, flooded the market. Because the Ming relied on silver as its primary currency, this caused ruinous hyperinflation and widespread famine. The end came not from the Great Mongol threat, but from within. In 1644, a massive peasant rebellion led by Li Zicheng captured Beijing. The final Ming Emperor Chengzhen committed suicide on a hill in the imperial gardens, while the Manchus would later sweep in to establish the Qing dynasty. The Ming had already paved the way for their own destruction. They chose static stability over global engagement, proving that an empire's greatest enemy is often its own inability to adapt. Perhaps the most important lesson we learned from the Ming dynasty is that progress often involves discomfort. When we prioritize stability over evolution, we fell behind. What do you think? Was the decision to burn the fleet the most costly mistake in history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into history's forgotten decisions, like and subscribe.